This is not a kitten or a puppy video. It's a spiritual retreat. I'm inviting you to stop what you're doing, pause, sit down, get to a quiet place, light a candle if you need to. This is not a puppy or a kitten video. How many times we're so quick to multitask all of our relationships, including our relationship with God? This is not that type of video. This is part of it was originally designed as a parish mission, and it's broken up into different segments to go through the 8 Beatitudes. This matters. Again, no more multitasking time with Jesus. I'm asking you to sit aside, maybe go to your room and close your door, and sit in your prayer chair or your soon-to-be prayer chair. And when you do that, you can come on a journey to reflect a little bit more deeply on the 8 Beatitudes. You see, Jesus himself was a living icon of all 8 Beatitudes. And by getting to know him, we're called to know how you and I are called to live and what he knows and what he rewards as truly blessed. So come and join me. Come and join me to find out about these 8 Beatitudes. We'll start with the first. Blessed are the poor in spirit. One of the most moving stories of peacefulness in difficult times is the story of Cardinal Francis Xavier Van Thuan. He passed away in 2002. He was the Archbishop of Saigon in Vietnam in the 70s. And right after he was named the Archbishop, he was arrested by the communist government because he was labeled a Vatican spy. And this reality that he was put under house arrest and confined to his home. Sound a little bit familiar for all those homebound situation? Only this wasn't going to last just a few months. His homebound situation lasted 3 years. Are you kidding me? After these 3 years, this confinement became much more intense, and he was placed in prison for being that Vatican spy. They placed him in a tiny windowless cell, probably smaller than most people's bedroom. Think about that. Being quarantined in your bedroom or smaller, no natural light for months, and it would go on, frankly, for 10 years. And when he first got to the prison, he was feeling very overwhelmed because he was doing a lot of good things, and he was talking to God, kind of, he says, complaining to God in his prayer. And he said, Lord, what are you doing? I was doing so many good things. I was starting Catholic education and teaching the children. I was starting new religious communities and bringing more seminarians. I was involved in works of charity, doing so much good for you. Like, where are you? How come I'm stuck in prison? And he said this, and then I heard a voice, and the voice said this: you need to be less concerned about God's works and more concerned about God. He was like, what? You need to be less concerned about God's works and more concerned about God. And then he realized that you're called to surrender and trust me during these times. Even if it seems like you can do little, trust me and walk with me, even and especially amidst these circumstances. So that's what he did, literally, for the next 10 years. He prayed every day and had a little prayer schedule, but it certainly wasn't easy. He celebrated Mass in secret. He had them sneak in little host and the flashlight battery pack. And he celebrated, his chalice was his hand, where he had some stomach medicine, which was wine. And he put 3 drops of wine and 1 drop of water. He celebrated Mass by memory while he was in prison. He tried to be kind to his persecutors, and literally while he was in prison, they did a lot of psychological torture and would turn off the lights for like 2 weeks at a time, turn on the lights for 2 weeks at a time. They'd oversalt his food, and he wouldn't have, then he wouldn't give him anything to drink. Or they would give him plenty to drink, but wouldn't let him have bathroom breaks for days upon end. You see, it was just an awful situation, but he said, I need to follow God as best as I can and by his grace. You see, blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. One who is completely surrendered to God. You see, we need God for everything, especially in difficult circumstances, but we always need God and his grace. What does that mean to be poor in spirit? Frankly, it means giving up the idea that we can control anything, or everything's in our hands, or we have to do everything ourselves. It means living in that reality. We need God. Do you believe that? That's what it means to be poor in spirit. Now, most of us don't like that idea of being dependent on anything or anyone, especially in America. That American spirit, do everything ourselves, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, grit, get things done, put your nose to the grindstone. There's goodness with that kind of virtue, but none of it's understand apart from God. Listen to the words of Jesus that are so precious to St. Isaac Jogues. It's part of our mission statement. It's from John chapter 15. I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me you can do nothing, but with me you will bear much fruit. Do we believe this? You see, the poor in spirit realize that we're daily beggars. This sense of like, I need daily bread today. Even in the Gospel of Luke, when it has the other set of Beatitudes, it uses the phrase, blessed are the poor. Now, it's not because they don't have money or they struggle financially. That's not why they're blessed. There's plenty of poor people, but people who don't have a lot of things many times realize, I can't rely on myself. I need to rely on God all the time. They're more disposed, ultimately, to God and God's grace because they know they need them. Are we convinced that we need God? It should affect how we see even things like daily prayer. The poor in spirit don't fit prayer into the day. It's a necessity. It's like going to the bread lines every day and say, I need to be able to feed my family or I need to feed my soul, that I might do everything that God's asking us to do. No one will forget to plug in their smartphone at night, or if not, it's not going to be charged the next day. And yet, it's through God, it's through prayer that we draw grace and strength and light to live out the day, to be faithful to everything we're called to do. And it could be said that maybe spiritually people are not aware of that. If you lack being poor in spirit, you're going to feel spiritually drained, not able to be generous or selfless in the way that God's calling to be. It'd be like our spiritual batteries running low, or even just going dead, literally. The temptation is to take care of everything ourselves, and yet that's not the case. I had nephews, and when they were growing up, many people said this. When they're growing up, like little kids start to do things, they're like, Uncle Brian, I can tie my shoes. Uncle Brian, I can pour the cereal myself. Uncle Brian, I can vacuum the living room. Yes, keep vacuuming the living room. And yet the reality is this is on a human level, when we grow up, we take more responsibility, as we should. It's somewhat similar in the spiritual life, only it's this. In the spiritual life, we never ever stop being children. In fact, we're more and more cured of the illusion that it was all up to us all along. We're not talking about being passive here. We're called to do what God's calling us to do, but the foundational, we need His grace for everything. And when we know that, things change. Mother Teresa had that attitude. I remember hearing Mother Teresa would say, please pray for me and pray for my works. Pray that I don't get in the way of God and His works. And we're like, Mother Teresa, you should be praying for us. Mother Teresa truly was poor in spirit. She knew that she too needed that prayer. Pray for me. Pray that I don't get in the way. There's a famous quote from St. Ignatius of Loyola. Maybe you've heard it before. Many people are very drawn to it. It says this: pray as if everything depends on God. And work as if everything depends on you. Let's unpack that for a moment. Pray as if everything depends on God. It does depend on Him. And so give everything before Him. And then work as if everything depends on you. Give God your best. No slacking. Live up to your full potential in everything He's calling you to do. So that's very powerful. Only some of the Ignatian scholars, the Jesuit scholars, said, actually, there's good evidence that the phrasing was flipped around. Now, both can be very good things to reflect on. But this is how they said the scholar is that Ignatius, it was originally written. It says this: pray as if everything depends on you, and work as if everything depends on God. Let's unpack that one. Pray as if everything depends on you. How many people, if you're you're in charge, you have to make the decision, how many people are what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to know? If anything, the full weight of responsibility can remind us that I need to literally be on my knees. Lord, because I have this responsibility, I need you. Lead me, guide me, show me what I'm called to do. And second, work as if everything depends on God. There's a certain peacefulness where hey, this is God's work. Does it have to be successful? No. Am I called to do it? Yes. How beautiful it is that we're called to do what God is asking us. Look, I'll leave the rest, I'll leave the fruitfulness to God. That's not up to me. So we can have a certain peacefulness. Frankly, we can have a great, even the phrase is magnanimity, magnanimous, someone who's large-souled. We can take great steps of faith because work as if everything depends on God. Sometimes we're just called to do things that may not make sense on a natural level. Sometimes it might be taking steps of faith that may not make natural sense, but will bear fruit if we take them. So more and more when we do that, we live in a different way. You see, this reality of hoping that we're always in good health, that's not something that's promised. We can't lean on it. Blessed are the poor in spirit that are not just relying on good health. Or financial security, again, something that God's not promised in a moment. Again, the stock market can be gone in a moment. God did not promise financial security, stability in relationships or otherwise. He didn't promise we wouldn't have trials, and he didn't promise we wouldn't have crosses. But this is what he did promise. Instead of leaning on these things that are good things, but can't be your everything, make me your everything. And in that you'll have a peace and stability that nothing can rock and nothing can shake. How beautiful that is. You know who's a great witness of someone who was poor in spirit? John Paul II, St. John Paul the Great. Here was a man who truly, he prayed. He was always on his knees praying, drawing strength from God, who is love, so he could do everything that God was calling him to do. He didn't fake it, he lived it. And he had that sense of completely dependent on God in the intercession of Mary. And then at the same time, he wasn't afraid to take big steps of faith. I'll never forget the story of World Youth Day, which was really a huge step of faith. And John Paul II approached the bishops of the United States and said, I'd like to come to the United States. I'd like to come to gather the young people. And most of the American bishops actually said, Holy Father, we don't want to embarrass you. Our young people are apathetic. They're not really involved in their faith. We don't want to embarrass you. Holy Father says, I'd like to come to the United States. So Cardinal Stafford, the Archbishop of Denver, said, I'll host it. He was originally from Baltimore before he was sent to Denver. And I have this picture in my office that's a picture of John Paul II and Cardinal Keeler in Mile High Stadium looking up at all the crowds of the people that came. What seemed impossible or even foolish became a great work of God and a great work of grace. You see, the poor in spirit have that willing to take a step of faith, to let God, it be a work of God, and God to bless it, and God to draw the fruitfulness. You see, we need to remind ourselves that things aren't in our hands, but we need to more and more entrust them to Him. Last story I leave you with is this. Do you know the story of St. Teresa of Avila, a doctor of the church? She was a kind of a really good reformer of the church. She was joyful. She was just really did a lot of good work for God. But she didn't. Most of her life, she struggled with very poor health. She was opposed in the reforms that she was doing. She was undermined regularly. She was even voted out as Mother Superior by her own sisters. And all the things she was doing, she had a very challenging life. Only in the midst of all these challenges, she wrote a famous prayer of trusting in God above all things. Listen to the prayer and please pray it with me. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. You see, when we live in that way, we truly are poor in spirit. And that's what matters to God. Those who are humble and more rely and lean on Him as we should for everything. Doing our effort and responding to His grace. When we do that, truly, truly, Jesus says, you will be blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven.